Hello everyone, Darkside Phil here, and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series where I give you maximum truth and minimum bullshit when it comes to the latest video game releases. Now, today's review, admittedly, is coming far after the fact of the release of this game simply because the game I'm about to review has an incredible amount of content, and being that it is an RPG style game, this was the kind of game that I wanted to play at length, at my own pace, not rush through and end up skipping a bunch of the content, so that I could more fairly accurately represent this game in the actual review. This is also a game which the series I have pretty much history with. If you want to talk about the previous iteration, we're going to talk about all that in a moment, but the game that we're reviewing today is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, and I have to preface this entire review before I even say a word of criticism or anything about the game, that this is a review of the PlayStation 4 version of the game. I want to make that abundantly clear because there are three versions of this game: PC, Xbox One, and PlayStation 4. From all reports, each version has positives and negatives, alright? Some have better graphics, some have more bugs, etc., etc. I want to make it abundantly clear, I played the PS4 version, so anything I say in this review is indicative of my own experiences with the PS4 version. If you played a different version of the game, you very well may not have experienced any of the things that I experienced during my playthrough, and that's okay. Alright, so first of all, let's start. Over 4 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, I played a little game called The Witcher 2, and at that time, I had absolutely no idea what to expect, because keep in mind, this was before the era of the difficult RPGs, meaning games like Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and I hadn't played any of those games, and they hadn't really gone mainstream yet, so I had no idea what I was expecting when I went into The Witcher 2. I was thinking, here's a game where I'm going to play, it's going to have a good tutorial like a modern game, and I'm going to jump into it and be able to adapt to the controls right away, and that was not the case. That was a gruelingly difficult game that eventually the game makers at CD Projekt eventually patched the shit out of it to make it much easier, to have a better tutorial, to have a less difficulty in the game, because the common person just jumping into that game could not play it. It was too freaking hard. Now, for me, I forged my way through that, and eventually I did beat that game, and I really ended up enjoying The Witcher 2 after I finally got the hang of everything in it. The problem is the game didn't really help you along. Fast forward now to modern times, right? Witcher 3, in a lot of ways, improves upon that issue. It actually does have, I'd say, a much better tutorial in this game than The Witcher 2 did. In the difficulty levels, at least at the default levels, which is what I always play at, in this game are much easier, much, less difficult to cope with. A newcomer could easily jump into The Witcher 3 if you've played other action-style RPGs and say, okay, I can get it and I can win at this game, versus, oh my god, there's such a difficulty level curve, okay? So if anything, that's actually one of the big improvements of the game. So let's talk about The Witcher 3. It's a huge game, and what I mean by that is we're talking one of the biggest maps I've ever seen in an open world RPG. Now, you might say to yourself, but we just had Dragon Age Inquisition, right? Yeah, I'd say it's pretty much on par with a game like Dragon Age Inquisition when it comes to the breadth and the length of the game, the amount of content in the game. In fact, map-wise, obviously I didn't measure to say, oh, the map's any bigger or smaller, but I can certainly tell you side content-wise that The Witcher 3 very much topples Dragon Age Inquisition with the amount of content in the game. There are different primary kinds of content in the game we're going to talk about. First, let's talk about the main plotline very quickly with minimal spoilers. You once again reprise the role of Geralt the Witcher, the monster hunter, and through the course of the game, you are tracking down Ciri. This was your ward or your apprentice from the first Witcher game, who basically was missing from the second one. Now you're trying to track her down because in the plotline of this game, she apparently has these really, mysterious magical powers, and she's on the run from these evil group of guys called the Wild Hunt, who are very enigmatic. You're not sure who they are, but they're basically supernatural powered guys who are tracking her down and trying to catch her. Supposedly, Ciri has the power to, save or destroy the world in some post-apocalyptic event that's coming up, and it's your job, during the course of The Witcher 3, to go through this open world, talk to tons of different kinds of people, find out all kinds of information about Ciri's whereabouts, hopefully eventually track her down, and then either stop the apocalypse, save the world from the apocalypse, whatever it is, with a big, a big conclusion. And I'm not going to spoil about if you ever find her or anything like that, but that's the main plot line of the game. but by no means is that the only plot line in the game. What you will find in The Witcher 3 is that there are several legs of your journey. As you go to a new map and a new location, you're going to go into a big open world that says, not dungeons, but, what's the word I'm looking for? A climb. You know what I mean? Like a certain kind of region where you'll have maybe open world, a plateau with grass, or maybe there'll be a mountainous region, or maybe there'll be a bog-style region, or maybe there'll be one that's just a bunch of islands in the middle of a lot of water. And during this open world area, you can run into little towns, you can find dungeons like caves or whatever, you can encounter rare monsters that are kind of rare hunts for you, or you can just run straight to your story-based missions, okay? So there's tons of content in the game. The game is pretty much like another open world RPG in the fact that you can do everything on the map. There's all these little things on the map like a monster hut location or a group of bandits protecting a random treasure. And you could choose to do all of that, and it's incredibly time consuming, and I'll be honest, it's very repetitive. I started playing the game like that in the initial portion of the game, and after playing it for like 15 hours, I was like, this is really boring, and people were like, then stop doing that. Just stick to the kind of story-based side quest, and you'll like the game a lot more. I did, and I actually found, wow, that does actually help, because the side quests in this game, when it comes to an open world RPG, are some of the best I've ever experienced. You will run into unique characters that have been in past Witcher games and get all kinds of supplementary information about them and their lives and things going on with them. You'll meet new characters who will become sometimes part of the main plot, then they end up outside of the main plot getting their own side quest lines in addition to that. You will have kind of random quests, people who just need help, and you'll try to help them out. You'll have card games to play. You will have monster hunts because, yes, even though you are Geralt and you're on the hunt looking for your apprentice Ciri, you also are a monster hunter at heart, and so you'll take on contracts where you'll negotiate rewards for a certain amount of money to kill monsters. And these are some of the coolest side quests in the game because you do research. You actually use your Witcher senses to track down where this monster is, try to figure out in your bestiary Bible, which basically is your guidebook to monsters, what kind of monster is this, learn the monster's weakness, hunt it at a certain time of day, kill it, and if you're successful, go back and only get rewards, but you can get cool perks, you can find unique armor, all kinds of cool stuff for hunting down monsters in this game. So what I'm trying to tell you is that this game has an incredible amount of content, and unlike other RPGs where most of the side content is kind of repetitive, in this game, it's unique, it's fun, and yeah, of course, if you're talking big picture, if I do all the side content in the game and there's 100 hours of gameplay, yeah, probably 40 hours of gameplay is kind of the same, but you understand what I'm saying? There's so much content that's in the game that is up to you to play it at your own pace to decide if you want to do side content or not, and it really is a lot of fun. The graphics of Witcher 3, some of the best I've ever seen, and I'll actually go as far to say this, on this generation now of consoles, this is the best looking RPG that I've seen. I've recently said that there were other games that were, on a really high level. For an open world RPG fantasy style, this game has amazing graphics. But, that being said, on the PlayStation 4, this game chugs in places with the frame rate. And what I mean by that is it tries to run at a steady 30 frames per second, but a lot of the times in a big battlefield, if there's a ton of monsters around you, or if you're running through an action sequence with explosions and things going on, the frame rate will chug along around 10 to 15 frames per second. Now, that is a huge problem in my opinion. A game that's supposed to be, current gen on PlayStation 4, why the frame rate is so terrible, and of course there will always be people that say, well, let's port it. And you know what? You're right. I mean, you have a valid reasoning here. The game was designed primarily for PC and was ported to the consoles, but I still have to mention that in my review. That's a negative, and that shouldn't be on the consoles. They should have done a better job there, okay? But if you can forgive a chugging frame rate in parts, you are going to basically open yourself up to some of the most content ever in a $60 retail game. You're going to open yourself up to some of the most varied side content ever in a RPG, some of the best graphics of an RPG. The story itself has ups and downs, let me put it that way. There were moments in the story of this game where I was like, wow, this is an epic sequence and it feels awesome. And then there's times in the story where you're like, it's kind of dragging along a little bit, and I wish it would hurry through this portion so we could get to maybe a better portion or some different characters. Because that's really how the story kind of fleshes itself out. You have installments where you're dealing with different characters, and as you deal with them, maybe they'll be gone for the rest of the story, and some of them might return later on in the story, which is cool. So now, all that being said, the game is a very fun narrative experience, and I'll actually go as far to say the story and the narrative of this game, if you're doing the side content, is probably one of the best RPG stories overall with all the characters and all the fun stuff involved of any RPG that I've ever played. But now that I've gotten all of that out of the way, I do want to talk about the negatives of this game, alright? Because there were a bunch of them for me, and I want you to understand there's tons of people out there that are like kissing the shit out of the ass of this game, and I don't agree with them, alright? Even though I absolutely loved the story, and I love the fact that I took my time and got a ridiculous amount of content out of The Witcher 3, I've got some big gripes, alright? Number one, and this is probably the biggest one, the combat of this game is the same as it was in Witcher 2, which is pretty much the same as it was in Witcher 1, but at this point, at 2015, it's outdated, it's not a modern combat engine, and it's just ridiculously kind of overcomplicated to the point where you're like, what is half this shit? So let me explain. You're Geralt, the Witcher. Not only do you have cool swordsman abilities like light attack, heavy attack, the ability to parry attacks, to roll and dodge around combat as well, but you have magical spells that you can use. They're called signs in this game. For example, a fire spell, or a spell that might knock your enemy on their ass, or a spell that might mind control an enemy, okay? In addition to that, you've got oils, which you get by getting different blueprints that you find as loot throughout the game, and then loot that you looted through the game, like plants and stuff. You craft oils that you put on your swords that'll help you in certain situations, but not others. So certain monster type, maybe now is the time to put the oil on the sword. You can also make bombs. Bombs can somehow cause some kind of an environmental effect that sometimes affects enemies and sometimes doesn't. And now you see what I'm getting at. I just mentioned a ton of stuff. It gets so complicated and bogged down with the amount of stuff that's in the combat engine of this game. For a game that maybe this was a new game back in, 2009, 2010, whenever The Witcher 1 came out, okay, great, it's a new thing. But now we're in 2015, and when you have other combat engines that not only have taken the kind of combat from Witcher 3 and kind of refined it even better, and I hate to say it, games like Dark Souls, games like Bloodborne, the more difficult action RPGs out there have done combat better than this game. And I know there's going to be people who are hardcore fans of RPGs and also of Witcher. They're going to completely disagree with me. I've got to review it honestly as a common gamer who's played tons of games in the past several years. This combat engine leaves something to be desired, okay? Just 90% of the game, if you're playing on default difficulty like I do, 90% of the game you can beat by hacking and slashing. You never have to use oils. You never have to use any of the bombs. You rarely have to dodge until maybe the second half of the game. It's just that simple. Compare that with The Witcher 2, where that game handed your ass to you, right? So in that regard, The Witcher 2 was way too difficult at the start, and this game is pretty much way too easy for most of the game on difficulty settings. Now you may say, but Phil, why don't you just up the difficulty setting? Because I play at default setting. And if the game was meant to be at default levels more challenging and difficult, then it should have been. But I think what happened is that CD Projekt, the developers of this game, took a lot of flack for Witcher 2. And after Witcher 2, they said, we got it by default, make it way easy, but then we'll add the allowance to make the difficulty levels higher. So understand, if you like a challenge, if you're a fan of the previous Witcher games, you want a big challenge, this game has it, but you have to up the difficulty. For me, 90% of the combat was incredibly basic and easy. In addition, alright, just the game engine itself prevents you, for the most part, from veering off the path and fighting things that are higher level than you. So let's say by some chance you run into a really high level monster. Wham, I'm going to tackle it, right? Because again, you're playing other RPGs like Dark Souls. Sometimes you could do it. Not in this game. If that monster is, say, 10 levels above you, you can't even hit it. If you try to hit it, it does no damage. It'll insta-kill you. And that's kind of the problem. It's an archaic RPG engine. It doesn't have that real feeling of, wow, amazing open world, and I could do whatever I want. You can't. When you start the game, you really can't. It's only about halfway through the game. If you're doing tons of side content, if you end up doing so much content that you're over leveling your character, now maybe you can feel, wow, I'm powerful. Now I can really go throughout the world and do whatever I want. But you have to do tons of side content to feel that ability in the game. If you're just playing through the story, you're going to have tons of stuff you're going to have to skip and go around because you have to reach a certain level in order to get to it. In addition, a gripe that I have with this leveling system, there are missions in this game that will even say that they're close to your level, so you'll beat them, and the reward is loot that you can't use. The reward is loot that's 12 levels above you. I'm not going to get there for another 30 hours of gameplay, so what the hell do I want this now for? And that's the problem. By the time you're then, 12 levels higher, you probably already found equivalent loot or whatever throughout the world. You don't need the rewards from the quests. So in a lot of cases, I'd say again, until near maybe that second half of the game, none of the loot that I was getting from these quests really paid off. It was more just the experience points for making me a more powerful person, and that was pretty cool, but the loot in a lot of the times is very disappointing. You do this really tough quest, man, I hunted down this tough-ass monster, here's the reward, it's a blueprint for armor I can't equip for another 30 hours. Fuck. And that's kind of the deflating feeling you have in a lot of times during this game. So, the combat leaves something to be desired. It's really this. They must have had the attitude, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't agree in this case. I think in this case, the engine is outdated. The engine belongs back in Witcher 1, and they should have done refinements and things to this combat engine to make it better. They didn't, and the game feels like you're playing this amazing open-world version of a game from 6 years ago. That's really what it feels like, and that lags and lacks, in my opinion. It doesn't make the game feel like all that it can be, alright? In addition, yeah, there's problems with loading on the PlayStation 4, and that might be a PS4 only issue, but the loading of some areas is incredibly long, especially frustrating if you get to the end of a really tough dungeon or a rare boss or a rare monster, you're just about to kill it, you die, fuck, okay, now load for 2 minutes, and you're like, oh, it's like the weight of shame that you fucked up because you're waiting so long. Bugs and glitches. The PlayStation 4 version is rife with them. And I'm talking little graphical tweaks. You might have a guy who's an NPC who tweaks out like this. There'll be plenty of floating NPCs throughout the game, invisible NPCs. If you move too fast through a big town, things won't load properly and you'll have massive pop-in of buildings and buildings that are invisible, then they appear when you're inside of them. I had that many times. I ran to a quest marker, what am I supposed to be doing? Then the quest person appears in front of me and I still can't click on them. I gotta wait another 60 seconds before I can finally select them to activate the quest. That's a big issue, but then there's other game-breaking bugs that happen, such as Geralt falling through walls, Geralt fusing with the sides of mountains, enemies fusing inside of walls that are critical for you to win a quest. There were multiple quests where it was kill a certain group of monsters and get loot, but the loot would teleport to the top of a mountain when I was inside the mountain in a cave doing the quest. Well, can't finish the quest now because you can't go get your loot. You wasted your past 25 minutes doing this quest line, and it's like, motherfucker. Another big thing. The game is kind of like, it screams completionist because it's saying do all the quests. There's lots of side quests. They're all fun. Lots of supplementary characters. But quite honestly, if you do all the side content, you're wasting your time because you will pass the level of a lot of the content in the game. And if you do anything that's 5 levels or less than below you, you get no experience, or let me take that back, you get 5 experience per mission. So you could spend, this happened to me. I was doing all this other side content, then I finally went back to the story, and there was a story-based mission. I got 5 experience for it, and it took 45 minutes to beat. And I was like, that was a tough mission. It took tracking and hunting down a monster and a boss fight, 5 experience points. And that's kind of deflating too. Why not scale things to your level? Again, it seems like a more archaic engine for an RPG. It seems like you're playing a game from the last decade rather than a modern RPG. There's also one other glaring thing that I didn't like about the game. You're by yourself for most of the game. And I know that might not be an issue for some people. I'm used to playing an RPG where I'm one character and I'm a one-man army. But I like the fact that most RPGs these days you can form a party and there's a party structure and they have different abilities and they even have dialogue and stuff between them. I just recently played Dragon Age Inquisition. Of course I'm going to compare this game to it. And that game, you always had a party structure where it was you and your party were interacting and you could play different abilities of your party members off of each other, yada, yada, yada. And yeah, it was overall kind of easy to play, but it had that kind of social aspect to it. In Witcher 3, you're by yourself the whole game. Very rarely will there maybe be a quest here or there where you're escorting someone or doing something like that and they're helping you. So you're on your own. And I'll be honest, that feeling of isolation kind of makes certain portions of the game kind of drag on and not feel as fun as they were if you were with a fun party of people you selected and they're giving their little dialogue quirks and things into what you're doing. And that pisses me off. Don't get me wrong, there's tons of unique characters in the game. Some returning friends and foes from other games that end up doing different roles in this game. I loved the amount of voice acting, the amount of characters in the game, but never does that character really feel like that's a member of your saga or your party, because at any moment you're going to go off by yourself again and do more questing, and it kind of feels like, damn, I'm on my own again, and it doesn't get that camaraderie feeling that I got with other RPGs like Dragon Age recently. So for me, the game is a mixed bag. Insane amount of content, great graphics, tons of side quests that give you insane bang for your buck, a really awesome story. Let me tell you, the story, like I said, one of the best that I've played in an RPG ever, and it's very rewarding to get through this game and get to the end. And by the way, I want to mention, this game has multiple endings, dependent on your choices during the game, and I ended up getting a pretty good one that I like, but I've actually heard there's tons of endings to the game dependent on things you do during the game. There's these critical choices that you make that can affect different characters in the game, and depending on how that works out, it might change your ending. That's nice too, and a lot of people have said, this is what Mass Effect should have done, right? The Mass Effect trilogy promised that the whole time, and then when it finally came, it didn't really turn out. In this game, it kind of does. The choices you make affect things concretely during the course of the game, and that's a cool thing. So that's another positive for the game. But you gotta weigh all that with the fact that on the PS4, there's a choppy frame rate, there's tons of bugs, this is an archaic combat engine that doesn't feel modern, you're by yourself for most of the game, and it's kind of a mixed bag for me, alright? I will be honest, there's no way that I could say this is a bad game. I would be a fucking liar, because the game has tons of content, it is fun to experience. If you can be patient with the fact that the combat engine is kind of outdated, and the fact that there's going to be bugs on the PS4 version and stuff like that, you're going to have a blast with The Witcher 3. But if you're looking for the best RPG ever, you're probably going to be disappointed, especially with the wait that there was between Witcher 2 and Witcher 3, waiting for this game to come out. It comes out, and you're kind of like, it's good, but I feel like it could have been a lot better, right? So I have to be honest here. You know, in my opinion, I liked it. I think people who like this style of RPG will like it, but they're not going to absolutely say it's the best game I've ever seen. It's funny because I see people saying this is the game of the year, 10 out of 10, and I'm like, what game did they play? Because I see some of the points they're making, I'm like, I agree, but you're ignoring the flaws, and there's lots of flaws with this game that for me keep it from being like a game of the year, top game, 10 out of 10. So for me, with all the things weighed and considered and balanced in my head, I'm going to give The Witcher 3 The Wild Hunt an 8.25 out of 10. I think that it's good, it's a ridiculous amount of content, but because of the bugs on the PS4 version, because of the archaic combat engine, because you're by yourself most of the game and it's kind of almost lonesome and boring, you miss that camaraderie, it seems like they had an idea and it just doesn't get there. It doesn't hit that mark. But don't get me wrong. If you're a fan of Witcher, you're going to love the game. If you're a fan of open world RPGs, you should play this game. Just didn't do it for me. You know what I mean? Like when I played Dragon Age Inquisition last year, it didn't have as much awesome side content as this game, but the overall game blew me away. I didn't get that feeling with Witcher 3. It was like, this is fun, it's a great ride, but I feel like it could have been better, especially if they had modernized this game, which they really didn't, except for just making it simply easy on the normal difficulty, which isn't enough for me. I want more. I want refinement in the combat. I want things that are better. I don't want something that just makes it so easy for the average difficulty person. They could have done a lot more with it. I like The Witcher 3, 8.25 out of 10. I hope you check it out. But for me, it's not like amazing, blow me away, but it's still a great game that you should check out if you like RPGs. That's it for the Hateful Truth review, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time for maximum truth and minimum bullshit in my next game review. Peace out, and I'll see you then. Alright, let's see what Lambert has to say.
Let's collect our reward.
So?
What do you think? We did what we had to do. Time to pay up.